Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more notable members of Native American history. Today, we're talking about none other than Sitting Bull, one of the primary leaders in the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General Armstrong Custer met his fate. Sitting Bull was believed to have been born into a prominent Papa Lakota family between the years of 1831 and 1837 near the confluence of the Grand and Missouri rivers in present day South Dakota. His father and two of his uncles were chiefs within the tribe, so high standing already. He became an accomplished hunter and warrior, and by the time he killed his first buffalo at the age of 10, he was already demonstrating the four cardinal Lakota virtues of bravery, fortitude, generosity, and wisdom. At just 14, he counted his first coup, an honor earned in immediate proximity to the enemy. From that day, he would bear his father's name and was known as Tatanka Iotanka, Sitting Bull. Soon became a member of the Kit Fox Warrior Society and the legendary Midnight Strongheart Society, among others. The Stronghearts were an elite group of warriors who had earned entry into this prestigious society by repeatedly demonstrating their bravery and prowess against their enemies. His rise continued, and soon he emerged as one of two sash wearers of the group. It was not long before he was made leader of the entire society. So clearly, very skilled in combat, in bravery. So, yeah. As a leader, he was heavily involved in the Lakota struggle for identity during the 1850s. While some members of the community were open to engaging in relationships of commerce and diplomacy with the encroaching white world, others insisted the best position was to avoid such activities altogether. Sitting Bull was a vocal member of the latter camp, saying, "I have seen nothing that the white man has, which is as good as our right to roam and live on the open plains as we choose." Sitting Bull avoided white settlements and forts nearly altogether until the 1880s. So, think of this, 1850s were post a Mexican-American War, pre-Civil War. We have this whole stretch of land we purchased in 1803 called the Louisiana Purchase. And so we're just traveling further across the country and acting like it's never been inhabited in the first place. His leadership of the Lakotas extended beyond policy and into the spiritual realm as well. Through sun dances and vision quests, many Plains people sought guidance. On several occasions, the visions given to Sitting Bull by Wakantanka, the everywhere spirit, came true according to many of his followers. He soon became known as a spiritual leader in addition to his many other roles. So top class warrior, chief, spiritual leader, kind of leading on everything. In 1866, Chief Red Cloud and the Lakotas unleashed a massive campaign against travelers and forts along the Bozeman Trail. Within 2 years, they emerged victorious in the 1860 and in 1868. Red Cloud and others would sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie. In it, the Lakotas who had agreed to live within the boundaries of a reservation comprised mostly of the western half of modern day South Dakota in the Lakota's sacred Pahasapa, the Black Hills. It's something they've said already. Just let us go back home to the Black Hills. These were home. These were sacred territory to them. They have like so many millions or whatever in reparations that are set aside to go, but they keep saying, what we want is home. We will not accept the money as a replacement. So, however, Sitting Bull refused to be a part of these treaty negotiations, and as a result, he and others who did not agree with the conditions of the treaty felt no obligation to them. In Sitting Bull's view, those that agreed to the treaty represented themselves alone. These events began the fracturing of the massive Lakota nation into two ideological camps. Some would follow Red Cloud and Spotted Tail into the reservation, while others followed Sitting Bull and continued to live as they always had. Sitting Bull would emerge as a leader of what came to be known as the Non-Treaty Indians. In 1875, the U.S. decreed that the unceded territory, an area many non-treaty Lakotas inhabited, was now deemed closed. Those not on their respective reservation by January 31st, 1876 were considered hostile. In the spring, Sitting Bull and his followers remained outside the reservation, but did not comply with the deadline. In fact, Sitting Bull sent word to the reservation Lakotas that while they were living on few rations, he and his people were feasting on buffalo meat. Many began to leave the reservation for a summer hunt and went to find Sitting Bull and others. Lakotas and Cheyennes held a Sundance in mid-June where Sitting Bull had 50 pieces of flesh sliced away from each arm and went without water for 2 days and 2 nights. So he's doing 50 pieces of flesh from each arm and went without water for 2 days and 2 nights. Sitting Bull said he saw soldiers on horseback falling into their camp upside down. Their hats were falling off as they fell like grasshoppers. A voice told him, I give you these to you because they have no ears. Lakotas translated this to mean that they were soon to have a great victory against the Bluecoats. And many have speculated that this was what should take place just a few short weeks or would take place just a few short weeks after. Blah! Take place just a few short weeks later at the Battle of Little Bighorn. I cannot get my mouth to work properly. But yeah, the famous Battle Little Bighorn. On June the 25th, while camped along the Little Bighorn River, Sitting Bull's village, with approximately 7,000 Lakotas and Cheyennes, was attacked by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry. Sitting Bull, beyond fighting age, did not participate in combat, though he did send his nephews White Bull and One Bull into battle with his own personal medicine to protect them. The battle resulted in the deaths of approximately 80 Lakotas and Cheyennes and the complete annihilation of 5 companies of soldiers under Custer's immediate command, among others. News quickly spread back east of Custer's defeat, and people were in disbelief that the natives in the plains were capable of defeating such a sophisticated military attack. So yeah. While the battle was over, the war continued. Forces led by Generals George Crook and Nelson Miles continued to pursue the non-treaty natives for the next year and a half. In the fall of 1877, Sitting Bull and his followers headed north to the White Grandmother, Canada. Life in Canada was tough, but the buffalo were scarce. His people were plagued with sickness, and the winters were harsh. Through the next few years, Sitting Bull's followers would again fracture. Gradually, more and more left Sitting Bull's Canadian band and returned to reservation life back in the U.S. By 1881, even Sitting Bull's closest relatives, friends, and advisors were beginning to leave, and on July the 20th, 1881, he would surrender to the U.S. at Fort Buford in the Dakota Territory. Because remember, at this point, Dakotas were not yet states. Life on the reservation was difficult for Sitting Bull. Indian agents recognized no chiefs. Many Lakotas, including Sitting Bull's protege, Gall, were working diligently at learning to farm, but now internationally famous as the great architect of Custer's defeat, whether accurate or not, Sitting Bull's name garnered enormous fame among whites as well. He was courted by Buffalo Bill Cody to join his famous Wild West show. The chief was granted permission to travel with Cody's show in 1885 and was the instant headliner, and Sitting Bull would become friends with Buffalo Bill Cody. Cody even gifted Sitting Bull a gray horse that had been specially trained for the circus. After one season with Cody, Standing Rock agency agent McLaughlin refused to allow Sitting Bull to return to the show. Sitting Bull and Agent McLaughlin continued a contentious relationship for the next several years. By 1890, a new concern had arisen in the U.S. Army. A movement known as the Ghost Dance had begun in the Southwest, but was brought north to the Lakotas. The Ghost Dance said that if the Indians gave up all white ways and items, the buffalo would return. the ancestors would return and the natives would have freedom again. December the 15th, 1890, more than 40 Lakota police were sent to Sitting Bull's cabin to apprehend him for questioning, as McLaughlin believed Sitting Bull was involved in the ghost dance movement. 6 in the morning, Indian police, kicked in his front door and escorted him outside. As a crowd gathered, they became infuriated and began to shout desperately at the Indian police, and the scene burst into gunfire. By the time the guns went silent, Sitting Bull was dead, killed by a shot to the chest. So yeah. A ridiculous just uncouth end to someone who was such a leader to his people. Yeah. Let's go ahead and look at the Britannica entry. What I just got through reading, by the way, was from the National Parks Service. So, but let's go into Britannica and look at what they have here. Yeah, they say born circa 1831 near Grand River in the Dakota Territory, now modern-day South Dakota, and died December the 15th, 1890 on the Grand River in South Dakota. Was a Lakota Teton chief under whom the Oseti Sakowin, the Sioux peoples, united in their struggle against the encroachment of settlers on the northern Great Plains. As we've already discussed, it was just a continued march westward. Manifest destiny. That's the crap. I was trying to think of it last video, the meaning that they were going to go from coast to coast. Called Manifest Destiny. As principal chief of the Northern Hunting Oseti Sakowin, he led forces against the U.S. Army at the Battle of the Rosebud and Little Bighorn. Despite his victories, famine eventually made Sitting Bull and his followers surrender to the U.S. So yeah, a lot of the same information. They extended their territory, their hunting grounds westward into what had been the territory of the Shoshone, or Numu, Apoaluke, the Crow, Assiniboine, or Assiniboine, I've never known exactly how to pronounce that, and other indigenous peoples. First skirmish with the U.S. Army was in June 1863 during the Army's retaliation against the Santee, Dakota, after the Minnesota Massacre, in which the Lakota had no part. So essentially getting blamed for something they didn't do. For the next 5 years, he was in frequent hostile contact with the Army, which was invading Oceti-Sakowin hunting grounds and bringing ruin to the native economy. Became the principal chief of the northern hunting Oceti-Sakowin with Crazy Horse, leader of the Oglala Lakota, as his vice chief. Oh. In 1868, the Oceti-Sakowin accepted peace with the U.S. government on the basis of the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, which guaranteed the Oceti-Sakowin a reservation in what is now southwestern South Dakota. But when gold was discovered in the Black Hills in mid-1870s, a rush of prospectors invaded the lands guaranteed to the Oceti-Sakowin and the Arapaho by the treaty. Late in 1875, those Oceti-Sakowin who had been resisting the incursions were ordered to return to their reservations by January 31st, 1876, or be considered hostile. Even if Sitting Bull had been willing to comply, he could not possibly have moved his village 240 miles in the bitter cold by the specified time. In March, General George Crook, remember we talked about Crook and Miles during the video on Geronimo, which went really long. Took the field against the hostiles, and Sitting Bull responded by summoning the Oceti-Sakowin, Cheyenne, and certain Arapaho to his camp in Montana Territory. There, on June the 17th, Crook's troops were forced to retreat in the Battle of the Rosebud. The native chiefs then moved their encampment into the valley of the Little Bighorn River. At this point, Sitting Bull performed the sun dance, and when he emerged, induced by the rigors of the ceremony, he reported that he had seen soldiers falling into his camp like grasshoppers from the sky. The prophecy was considered filled on June the 22nd, when Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer rode into the valley, and all the men under his immediate command were annihilated at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Strong reaction among the U.S. public to the Battle of Little Bighorn resulted in stepped-up military action. The Oceti-Sakowin emerged the victors in their battles with U.S. troops, but though they might win battle after battle, they could never win the war. They depended on the buffalo for their livelihood, and the buffalo, unfortunately, under the steady encroachment of settlers, were rapidly becoming extinct, just hunting for food, hunting for the furs, hunting. And now the only real place you can see buffalo in the wild are Yellowstone Park. So, yeah. Hunger led more and more Oseti-Sakowin to surrender, and in May 1877, Sitting Bull, led by his remaining followers across the border, led his remaining followers across the border into Canada. But the Canadian government could not acknowledge responsibility for feeding a people whose reservation was south of the border, and after 4 years, during which his following steadily dwindled, famine forced Sitting Bull to surrender. After 1883, he lived at the Standing Rock Agency, where he vainly opposed the sale of tribal lands. In 1885, partly to get rid of him, the Indian agent who acted on the government's representative on the reservation allowed him to join Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, in which he gained international fame. Yeah, became real popular traveling with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Just because it's like, look at the real Sitting Bull, the man who defeated the U.S. military and General George Armstrong Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. The year 1889 saw the spread of the Ghost Dance religious movement, which prophesied that the advent of a native messiah who would sweep away the settlers and restore indigenous traditions. The Ghost Dance movement augmented the unrest already stirred up by among the Oseti-Sakowin by hunger and disease. As a precaution, Indian police and soldiers were sent to arrest the chief. After being seized on the Grand River on December 15, 1890, Sitting Bull would be killed while his warriors were trying to rescue him in all the gunfire, as we read in the last piece. So, buried at Fort Yates, but remains moved in 1953 to Mobridge, South Dakota, where a granite shaft marks his resting place. So, yeah. Like I said, we've seen already so many times when you try to. Many of the native peoples were just trying to live on their lives, but because of manifest destiny, hate that shit, it led to an inevitable clash. Can't live peacefully. No, these lands ain't occupied. We get them. So he is a warrior, a holy man, and the chief. Had several children: Crowfoot, who was a son; Many Horses, who was a daughter; Standing Holy, who was a daughter; William Sitting Bull, aka runs away from him. Nakasipa was one of his other sons. Lodge in Sight, who was a daughter, and John Sitting Bull, aka Refuses Them, who was a stepson. Wonder who he was married to. Would have to be one of the daughters, but yeah. Okay. Parrots were Jumping Bull and Her Holy Door. But yeah. It's just consistently over and over and over. No true willingness to make peace with the native peoples instead of forcibly coming in and taking lands. Anyway, we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting these links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.